My flight was supposed to put me in Seattle by sunrise. Instead, a mechanical issue sent me home at 2 in the morning, and that's how I found out my wife wasn't just cheating on me. She and the guy she was sleeping with were already planning how to talk me into an open marriage after the affair was underway. I'm a commercial airline pilot, so my life runs on schedules, checklists, and things making sense. That night, nothing did. We had an engine issue during pre-flight in Denver. Maintenance worked it for 2 hours, and then the aircraft was grounded. Passengers got rebooked, the crew got released, and instead of working the usual red-eye, I drove home through a dead quiet neighborhood, still half in work mode. The first thing that hit me was a black Audi parked 2 houses down, facing the wrong way on our street. In a neighborhood like ours, you notice stuff like that. I told myself it was probably a guest at the new neighbor's place and kept walking. Then I reached my front door, heard soft music inside, and the second my key touched the lock, the music cut off. Not lowered, not paused naturally, cut off. The house was dark except for a faint light upstairs in our home office, and before I even called out for Mallory, I saw 2 wine glasses in the sink. One had her lipstick on it, the other didn't belong to me. On the couch was a leather jacket, men's, expensive, definitely not mine. And suddenly, that Audi out front stopped feeling random. I went upstairs slow, not because I was scared, but because I already knew I was walking into something bad, and I wanted 1 second longer before it became real. The office door was shut. I could hear whispering on the other side, then drawers closing, then that kind of rushed silence people make when they're trying not to sound guilty. When I opened the door, Mallory was sitting at her computer, fully dressed, but nothing about her looked normal. Her hair was messy, her lipstick was smeared, and her whole face had that stiff, over-controlled look people get when they're improvising. She gave me this brittle little smile and said, "You're home early." I told her the flight got canceled. She said, "Oh," like I'd interrupted a meeting. Then I noticed the bathroom window was open. It was February, 2nd floor, freezing outside, and the curtain was moving in the draft. I walked over, looked down, and saw a man hurrying across the side yard toward that black Audi. Even from above, I knew exactly who he was. Gavin Cross. Senior photography editor at the magazine she freelanced for. He'd been in my house before, sitting at my table, drinking my coffee, talking in that smug way he had about art and freedom and not living inside old structures. The confrontation didn't happen all at once. First came the denial, then the partial truth, then the version she thought sounded modern enough to excuse what she'd done. Mallory kept saying it wasn't what it looked like, which was ridiculous because I had just watched a man climb out of my house through an upstairs window. Then she pivoted, said she'd been exploring polyamory, said she'd been learning about ethical non-monogamy and trying to understand herself better, said she had planned to talk to me when the timing felt right. I asked her one question, before or after you started sleeping with him? She didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. Then I saw the iPad on her desk. She'd been clicking around so frantically when I came in that she forgot to lock it. The screen was open to a message thread between her and Gavin, and I didn't have to dig for long. There were months of messages. Hotel plans lined up with my flight schedule. Photos I wish I'd never seen. And worst of all, messages about me. Not guilt, not remorse, strategy. They were workshopping how to pitch me an open marriage like I was some obstacle they needed to manage. I don't remember grabbing my bag, but I remember hearing the wheels scrape the floor as I pulled it toward the stairs. I remember Mallory following me, crying now, saying this wasn't how she wanted me to find out, which is such a selfish thing to say when you're the one who built the lie. I remember stopping at the front door and looking back at the house we'd bought together, the one where we'd talked about kids and future trips and whether the spare room would become a nursery or an office. And I remember realizing I wasn't leaving because of one bad decision. I was leaving because she and Gavin had already rewritten my marriage behind my back, then planned to hand me the script after the fact and expect me to play along. By the time I got to an airport hotel, my phone was exploding with messages about love, freedom, growth, and how marriage shouldn't mean ownership. I didn't answer any of them. I sat on the edge of that hotel bed in my pilot uniform, opened the photos I'd taken of her iPad screen, and understood that what I found in my house was only the part she didn't have time to hide. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open bathroom window, that black Audi, and Mallory sitting at her desk, trying to act like I was the one disrupting her evening. Around 3 in the morning, I stopped trying to rest and started going through everything I had access to. Her iPad was still synced to her cloud account, and because she panicked when I came home, she left more open than she realized. What I found wasn't one reckless mistake. It was a whole second relationship built around my work schedule. They knew when I'd be in Denver, when I'd be laying over in Portland, when I'd be wheels up and unreachable. They used my flights like calendar blocks. There were hotel bookings, restaurant reservations, private jokes about how easy airline life made things, and a draft email they never sent me. That draft hit harder than the affair itself. It laid out their plans step by step. Mallory would tell me she was reevaluating what commitment meant. Then, later, Gavin would naturally become part of that conversation. They weren't confessing. They were setting a trap and calling it honesty. By sunrise, I had gone from sick to cold. That's the best way I can explain it. The shock burned off, and something more useful took over. I started taking screenshots, forwarding statements, saving copies of messages, and building a folder the way I'd build a flight file. I checked our credit cards and found charges that matched the messages almost perfectly. Upscale restaurants for 2 on nights I was flying. Boutique hotels tied to industry workshops. Spa weekends billed as business development. Then I found out she'd opened a separate credit card a few months earlier. Same pattern, same lies, just more hidden. At a little after 6 a.m., my phone lit up with a number I didn't know. It was Dana Cross, Gavin's wife. Her first text was simple. "I think we need to compare notes." We talked within minutes. She had already been suspicious, and unlike me, she'd hired a private investigator. She had photos, dates, receipts, and enough evidence to make it clear this had been going on for months. She wasn't dramatic. She was calm, organized, and way ahead of both of them. Hearing her walk through what she had didn't make me feel better, but it did make one thing very clear. Mallory and Gavin weren't misunderstood free spirits trying to live honestly. They were 2 selfish people running the same play on both sides. At 9 a.m., I was sitting in a divorce attorney's office, still running on hotel coffee and adrenaline. Calvin Rhodes looked through the initial evidence and said it was one of the most thoroughly documented infidelity cases he'd seen this early. He told me to stop speaking to Mallory directly unless it was in writing, preserve everything, and be smart about money. I asked if I should freeze our joint accounts, and he told me no. He said sudden financial moves can create problems in court if they look retaliatory. Instead, he had me separate what I legally could, redirect my pay, cancel shared credit exposure, and start documenting every contact she made. From there, I went straight to the bank, then back to the hotel, and by the time I got upstairs, the messages had shifted. The first wave was anger that I had violated her privacy by reading what she left open on her own device. Then came long explanations about how she had always planned to tell me. Then came the version where I was supposedly punishing her for being honest about her needs. I blocked her after that. Not to be dramatic, just because once someone starts rewriting reality that fast, there's nothing useful left in the conversation. By late afternoon, the fallout had started spreading outside my hotel room. Mallory's sister Tessa emailed me to say she was sorry and that she'd had suspicions for a while, but didn't want to create problems if she was wrong. Her father Russell sent a message that was even harder to read. He apologized for his daughter, said trust matters in aviation because people's lives depend on it, and told me he never imagined she'd live this way. Dana told me she believed Gavin's employer had already been contacted with evidence, and I had no doubt that was about to get ugly. The really twisted part was how much of their affair used work as cover. The magazine, the travel shoots, the fake planning sessions at my house, the industry networking, all of it gave them legitimacy while they were sneaking around in plain sight. By nightfall, I had retained Calvin, secured a corporate apartment near the airport, and filed for divorce. Less than 24 hours earlier, I thought I was going to Seattle. Instead, I was sitting alone in a hotel room watching planes take off through the window and realizing the worst part wasn't that my wife cheated. It was that she expected to turn that betrayal into a philosophy lesson and make me thank her for it. 3 weeks after I walked out, my life was split into 2 tracks. One was practical: flights, legal meetings, bank statements, security codes, forwarding mail, figuring out what needed to be moved and what needed to be left alone until court. The other was the steady collapse of the life Mallory and Gavin had built behind everybody's backs. The divorce papers were served at the magazine, not at home, not in private, at work. By then, work was already the problem. Dana had turned over more evidence, and once the company started digging, they found out those two hadn't just been sneaking around. They'd been using assignments as cover, charging hotel stays and equipment rentals to the magazine, and billing trips that had nothing to do with photography. Calvin said people like that always think they're smarter than the paper trail. They weren't. Between the messages, receipts, timestamps, geotags, and their own photos, they had practically assembled an evidence package against themselves. The affair wasn't just personal anymore. It had crossed over into professional misconduct, and suddenly, Mallory wasn't the stylish creative who did international shoots and talked about freedom. She was an employee wrapped up in an internal investigation with a very ugly record behind it. Mallory didn't take the divorce filing like an adult. She took it like someone who still believed she could talk her way out of consequences. A few days after she was served, she showed up at my corporate apartment unannounced. I still don't know how she got the address, and I'm still irritated security even let her upstairs. She came in crying and talking fast, switching tones every 30 seconds. First it was, "We can still fix this." Then it was, "You're throwing away 7 years over one complicated situation." Then it turned into, "You're punishing me for being honest about who I am." That last part almost made me laugh, because there was nothing honest about getting caught with a man halfway out a second-floor window and then calling it self-discovery. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just told her the truth. If she had wanted a different kind of marriage, she could have used words before she used lies. The second I said that, the whole performance changed. The crying stopped, her face hardened, and she started talking about what she deserved after everything she had contributed to our life. The house, her studio, her career disruption, her emotional suffering. It was like watching someone forget they were supposed to be sorry and slip back into what they actually believed. Security walked her out while she was still talking, and by the time the elevator doors closed, Calvin was already adding the incident to the file. What surprised me most wasn't that Mallory kept trying to rewrite the story. It was how fast other people stopped helping her do it. Tessa reached out again and admitted she'd seen enough over the previous months to know something was off. She noticed the wardrobe change, the fake last-minute assignments, the way Mallory suddenly treated every question like an accusation. She said she stayed quiet because she hoped it was nothing, and because families get very good at avoiding the thing nobody wants to name. Russell hit even harder. He called me one night after one of my flights, and he sounded older than I'd ever heard him. He said trust is the whole job in aviation. You trust maintenance, dispatch, weather, training, the person next to you in the cockpit. Break that, and everything gets dangerous fast. Then he told me he was ashamed of how his daughter handled her life, and that I did not owe her another chance just because she finally ran out of ways to hide. That call stayed with me. So did the one from Dana. She had found even more. Gift purchases buried in expense reports. Professional materials that were actually jewelry. Weekend charges disguised as development costs. Every time she dug, something uglier came up. She wasn't just helping her own case anymore. She was exposing a whole culture of people inside that industry who treated deceit like networking. By the end of the 3rd week, the rumor mill had taken over the photography community. Someone leaked the private Instagram account Mallory and Gavin had used for their secret trips. And once people saw the dates and locations, everything they had denied started lining up. Clients backed away. Colleagues distanced themselves. Mallory tried the social media victim route, posting vague stuff about being judged for following her heart and refusing to live inside outdated relationship rules. That might have worked if the issue had been honesty. It wasn't. The comments turned on her fast because people knew the real story by then. Gavin went the opposite direction and disappeared. Deleted accounts, changed numbers, went silent. According to Dana, he was suddenly very interested in repairing his marriage now that his reputation was on fire. That detail got back to Mallory through industry gossip, and her messages to me changed again. The lofty language about freedom and growth disappeared. Now it was anger. Accusations. Claims that I had ruined her life by refusing to understand her. I stopped reacting to any of it. I moved more of my things into the apartment, kept flying, kept documenting, and let the legal process do what it was built to do. The next big fight was going to be assets, and Mallory had already started positioning herself to keep the house by calling it necessary for her home studio. After everything I'd seen, I was almost curious to hear her say that in court. 6 weeks after I found out, the story somehow got worse without getting surprising. By then, I already knew Mallory had cheated, lied, and tried to dress it up as some enlightened relationship model. What I didn't know that night was how organized the dishonesty really was. Dana got access to a private group chat tied to people in their industry, and what she found made my skin crawl. It wasn't just Gavin and Mallory swapping lies. It was an entire circle of photographers, editors, and creative people trading advice on how to hide affairs, how to scrub metadata from photos, which hotels asked the fewest questions, and how to turn fake business trips into real cover. Some of them were even talking about company reimbursements like it was a game. Once the magazine's parent company realized this wasn't one messy office romance, but part of something bigger, the investigation widened fast. Senior staff got suspended, finance teams started tearing through years of expense reports, and advertisers began distancing themselves. Mallory had spent months telling herself she was part of some modern, honest, boundary-breaking world. In reality, she was standing in the middle of a fraud ring with mood boards. The divorce process got sharper, too. Calvin subpoenaed more financial records, and once we had the full picture, it was ugly. Mallory had pushed more than $15,000 in professional development through our joint money. That included spa weekends, luxury hotel stays, designer clothes, and expensive dinners that somehow all landed on nights I was either flying or overnighting. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft with a creative job title slapped on top of it. The separate credit card she opened was worse than I first thought, and Dana found a storage unit neither of us had known about that was packed with camera equipment bought through company money and personal accounts. The hearing on temporary asset issues did not go the way Mallory expected. She tried to argue she needed the house to preserve her business and creative stability, and Calvin was ready for that. He laid out the timing, the hotel charges, the private account, and those photos of our bedroom being used for anything but work. The judge didn't raise his voice or make a speech. He just looked annoyed, which honestly felt even better. The house was ordered sold, and suddenly the woman who had spent months acting like she controlled the narrative was forced to live inside a version of events she couldn't edit. What really finished whatever sympathy I had left was how both of them behaved once pressure hit. Gavin, the guy who talked nonstop about authenticity and rejecting social constraints, folded the second his reputation was threatened. Dana showed me part of an apology email he sent his wife and HR, and it was exactly what you'd expect from a coward with a polished vocabulary. He blamed Mallory, claimed she initiated everything, claimed she pressured him, manipulated him, even pushed him into some of the expense fraud. Real convenient timing for him to discover moral clarity. When Mallory found out he was throwing her under the bus, she showed up drunk at his house and caused such a scene the neighbors called the police. That made its way through the same gossip channels they used to build their secret little life, and by then everybody in that community had picked a side or backed away from both of them entirely. Her family was done defending her too. Tessa sent me screenshots of messages where Mallory bragged to a friend about living her best life while I was in the air working. Russell stopped speaking to her for a stretch after that. He told me later there's only so much disappointment a person can dress up before it just becomes the plain truth. The strangest part of those weeks was how normal my own life started to feel once the lie was out in the open. My crew knew enough to understand I was going through something brutal, and they closed ranks around me in a way I won't forget. Other pilots swapped routes so I wouldn't have layovers in cities tied to the affair. People covered for legal appointments without asking nosy questions. One of the guys even made a fake cockpit checklist that ended with toxic X's negative, and I laughed harder than I expected to. It was the first real laugh I'd had since that night. Meanwhile, Mallory kept sending messages through every route she still had. Some were pleading, some were angry, some tried to sound evolved and philosophical again, like if she found the right wording, I'd suddenly forget what she did. I saved every one of them and sent them to Calvin. Every attempt she made to regain control only gave us more proof that she still didn't understand the simplest part of this whole thing. She wasn't losing me because she wanted something unconventional. She was losing me because she lied, planned around the lie, and only started talking about honesty after the lie stopped working. 9 weeks after that canceled flight, I finally had enough distance to see something clearly. The affair itself was ugly, but the bigger damage came from how completely Mallory had rebuilt her identity around deception. By then, her career in professional photography was basically done. This wasn't just local gossip anymore. Professional groups had revoked memberships, galleries pulled her work, and people who used to praise her eye and creativity wanted nothing to do with her name. She tried to relaunch under a cleaner image with a personal blog about art, freedom, and starting over. But the internet doesn't care about rebranding when the receipts are still floating around. Every post turned into a comment section full of people bringing up ethics, fraud, and the affair. The same industry connections she thought made her untouchable were now the reason the fallout spread so fast. Once enough people understood that she and Gavin had used assignments, expense accounts, and professional access as cover, nobody wanted to be the next person caught defending them. The legal side kept moving in my favor, mostly because Mallory could not stop making bad decisions. Discovery turned up more hidden financial mess than we expected, including a lease on a downtown apartment tied to Gavin that Dana uncovered during her own case. That mattered because it showed this wasn't some impulsive emotional spiral. They had logistics, plans, backup spaces, separate funding. Calvin kept saying judges pay attention when a lie becomes operational, and that's exactly what this was. Every new record made Mallory's alimony arguments weaker and made her claims about confusion and emotional struggle sound less credible. What really put the last nail in it was Gavin's history. Dana found evidence he'd done this before in California, in earlier relationships, with women he worked with. Mallory didn't know that when she blew up her marriage for him. The look on her face in court when that came out was the first time I saw her genuinely lose control. Not because she finally understood what she did to me, but because she realized she wasn't the exception in his life. She was a repeat pattern. Around the same time, my own life started feeling like mine again. I bought a place near the airport. Nothing fancy, just clean, quiet, and fully mine. No hidden charges, no strange cars on the street, no second layer to anything. I kept the design simple on purpose because after months of lies, I was tired of surfaces. Work helped too. I'd started training younger pilots, and I found myself talking more about judgment, discipline, and trust than I used to. Not in a confessional way, just honestly. Flying teaches you fast that systems matter, but character matters more when the system gets stressed. Russell called me not long after he officially retired from flight instruction, and that conversation stayed with me. He asked if I'd consider taking on a few of his long-term students because he wanted them with someone steady. Then he said something that I knew would hit Mallory harder than anything the court did. He said he still considered me part of the aviation family, and at this point, he trusted me more than he trusted his own daughter. I didn't know what to say for a second. I just thanked him and told him I'd help. Mallory, meanwhile, tried a softer version of the same old game. She pivoted from self-righteous to reformed and started posting about healing, accountability, and learning from mistakes. If she had left it there, maybe people would have moved on eventually. But then someone leaked screenshots of a dating profile she'd created just 2 weeks after discovery, where she described herself as ethically non-monogamous and emotionally evolved. That pretty much killed the redemption tour. She still didn't get the difference between a lifestyle choice and a betrayal. Therapy helped me sort that out too. I found a counselor who specialized in betrayal trauma and also happened to be a private pilot, which made a real difference. I didn't have to explain the lifestyle, the schedules, or what it does to you when someone uses your flight plan as a cheating calendar. He kept things practical, and one of the first things he told me was this: closure usually doesn't come from the person who broke trust. It comes from what you do after you finally see them clearly. He was right. By the 9-week mark, I wasn't waiting for Mallory to understand what she'd done. I was watching the last pieces fall into place and realizing the final stage of this story wasn't going to be discovery or revenge. It was going to be freedom. 9 months after that canceled flight, my divorce was finalized, and for the first time in a long time, nothing in my life felt unstable. The house sold cleanly. The pension fight went nowhere for Mallory, because the judge had already seen enough of the financial records to understand exactly what she'd done with marital money. Her lawyer actually withdrew before the end after she tried to push obviously questionable expense claims as if the court hadn't already caught on to her pattern. By that point, the legal part wasn't dramatic anymore. It was just finished. And that felt better than any speech or courtroom moment could have. After months of chaos, the most satisfying thing in the world was watching the paperwork close on a life that had been dead long before I admitted it. What happened between Mallory and Gavin after everything blew up was almost predictable. The two of them tried dating openly once their spouses were out of the picture, and it lasted all of 17 days. He moved in with her right after Dana kicked him out, and for about 2 weeks they posted the kind of forced, over-curated content people post when they're trying to prove something to strangers. Then Mallory caught him using their shared account to chase other women in the same photography world. So the man she helped wreck her marriage for did the exact same thing to her almost immediately. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. It wasn't revenge. It was just the most obvious ending possible for two people who built a relationship out of selfishness and deception. You can't build something stable with someone whose whole value to you was that they were willing to lie. Her attempts at reinventing herself kept collapsing for the same reason. She tried freelancing under her maiden name, but people still found the story. She tried positioning herself online as some kind of authenticity coach, which would have been funny if it weren't so shameless. Then came one last move that told me she still hadn't changed at all. A few weeks ago, she mailed me a 12-page letter about growth, pain, forgiveness, and how adversity had transformed her. Inside were photos from our marriage that she had edited to look more artistic, like changing the color tone and framing could somehow change what those years meant. She quoted philosophers. She wrote about connection and truth. She still couldn't say the simplest thing plainly, that she lied to me for months, used my schedule against me, and only started preaching honesty after she got caught. I read the whole thing once, took it outside, and burned it in a fire pit in my backyard. Not because I was angry in that moment, because I was done letting her package betrayal as insight. Meanwhile, the people who actually deserved peace found it. Dana turned everything she uncovered into something useful and built a consulting business around expense fraud prevention. Last I heard, she already had major publishing clients and was doing well. Russell fully retired and sent a few of his long-term students my way, which meant more to me than he probably realized. My crew stayed solid. My new place near the airport finally feels like home, and I even started a photography club for pilots. Real photos this time. Layover sunrises, empty gates, weather rolling in over the runway, quiet moments in cities we only see between flights. Nothing staged, nothing hidden. Just honest snapshots of a life that finally feels clean again. Looking back, the best thing that happened to me was not the divorce, the court ruling, or even the proof. It was that mechanical failure in Denver that sent me home early before I wasted more years living inside a lie I didn't know existed. I thought that night ruined my life. It didn't. It exposed the part of my life that was already broken and forced me to stop pretending I could still trust it. If you made it this far, I appreciate you being here. If this story hit you, please like, share, and subscribe because it really helps the channel, and I'd love to keep bringing you stories that actually go somewhere and pay off. I want to hear what you think about this one. Which warning sign do you think mattered most before the truth came out? Would you have confronted her that same night, or stayed quiet and gathered more evidence first? And once someone tries to turn cheating into a philosophy lesson, do you think there's ever any real coming back from that?